So I have the opportunity to share with you this idea of higher ground. And I'm going to invite you into the edge of my own learning, my own development. And I want to bring your attention to the slide because it says a very important word, the pursuit of higher ground. I am not up in higher ground putting my hand and asking you to come and join me. I am not operating. That is not my orientation. That is not my intention to suggest that I am somewhere above the group and I want to share it so you can come join me. I am rather asking you to join me in a pursuit of something that's bigger than all of us. And so there really is an orientation here of a pursuit that I want to emphasize, and I'll do my best to come back to. Here's an image. I'd like you to just, conscious leadership is an inside job. We talk about this all the time at Conscious Capitalism. Conscious leadership is an inside job. What comes to mind? What comes into your bones when you see this image? It's a jarring image. It's a provocative image. It's an image that when I look at it, I feel uncomfortable. Because on May 25th, 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, I felt the ground beneath me start to move in ways that I had never experienced. And I was so confused about what was going on. And I remember going outside 4 or 5 days later. I was crying over those days by myself. I didn't know how to make sense of my own feelings. I was completely and totally perplexed. And I was walking on a Saturday morning, and I ran into some neighbors, other rich white guys, and they were in a great mood. And they looked at me and they said, "Rand, you don't look good." And I said, "I'm not good." Like, dudes, I'm not good. And they're like, "Why aren't you good?" And they were completely oblivious to what I was experiencing because they weren't paying attention. And Tom Peters, raise your hand if you know the name, Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence, author, he had written something years ago. And he said, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. And I go, wait a second. These guys aren't confused. They're not disoriented because they're not actually paying attention to what I was paying attention to. And so I set out on a journey to try to make sense of what was going on for me and what was going on for us in this country. And it started with a question of race, and then it went to income inequality, and then it went to climate. And I said to myself, well, is that what's really going on with our conflict, with our culture war? And I realized that no, that's not the root cause of the conflict. And what I went on a search of going upstream from the actual result that I was seeing in the behavior of Americans, and really around the world. And what I realized is that it really had to do with, at least in my own learning, it had to do with, and John put a picture of glasses up earlier, which I loved, of our own worldviews. And I want to invite all of us into the possibility that the world that we're seeing and full of conflict is being processed and interpreted, and meaning is being made of that in unique ways. This is called a worldview. And when we think about worldviews and how there's a lens that we're actually filtering reality through, there's a saying that many of you have seen: we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. Does this make sense? We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And one of the moves of a conscious leader is to have enough self-awareness to recognize that we're all filtering the world through our own unique lens. And if we want to make sense of what's happening, especially in moments of conflict, we might want to ground ourselves in the beautiful diversity of how people are making sense of the world. And so I'm going to give you an oversimplified view of a angle, I'm not saying it's the only one, of the primary worldviews in America. There is a worldview for the achievers, This is also called the modernist, those that are sort of orienting from a place of science and rational thought and innovation. And there is beautiful contributions, healthy things that come out of the achiever consciousness, the achiever worldview. And let's look at those as the light. So modern science, extension of life, decreasing of infant mortality, economic development for the world, the greatness and the healthy parts of capitalism, the light. But where there is light, there is shadow. Where there is light, there is shadow. Shadow, greed, self-dealing, cronyism, environmental destruction. You guys getting this? There is light and there is shadow within everything. That's just a natural law I would suggest is reality. There's light and shadow in everything. And can we see the light and the shadow in the achiever worldview? Well, what about the traditionalist worldview? The traditionalist worldview, which has its own light, and I would suggest a healthy expression of this worldview would be in family values, would be in the healthy expression of patriotism, would be in law and order, okay? Yet, if there's light in traditionalism and the traditionalists, then there must be shadow. Things like sexism, homophobia, things like a distrust of institutions, things like anti-science. And you're like, Rand, you're being sort of critical of traditionalists, you're being critical of achievers. I'm being equally sober to the beauty, the things about both of these worldviews that I adore in their healthy expressions, and the things about both of these worldviews that terrify me in their pathology and their shadows. And then finally, progressivism, the progressive worldview, the lens that is making meaning through that set of glasses. And the progressives have also light, things that I'm so drawn to. The recognition of previously marginalized communities. I'm like, yes. The recognition of the importance of protecting our environment. Yes. I love this. And yet, where there's light, there's shadow. And so the shadow of things like what's called academically anti-modernity or anti-capitalism, where the shadow, I'm not saying progressives, just like I'm not saying traditionalists or achievers, but the shadow, not the human beings, but the shadow, would suggest that the achievers are the villain in the story. Does this make sense? Like the villain. Like if we're capitalists, the villain of what's happening right now. And other things like cancel culture would be an easy one that's accessible. And so there's light and shadow in it all. Now, when I show this slide to people, it's pretty common and understandable that you would find a particular, let's call it camp, that has a culture that most resonates. And maybe this is not the case for all of us, but our fellow Americans are looking for a place to actually subordinate themselves to, because the complexity of what's going on in the world today is hard. And the nuance that is required for a path forward is hard. And so maybe it's just a little bit easier to hit the easy button and pick the camp that most resonates, to pick the narrative that most resonates and join that camp. Now, I want to imagine what it's like, and all of us, to be watching media on the right, Fox News, media on the left, more CNN, media in the middle, if you listen to Sam Harris, and saying, there's all these economic incentives for us to actually be outraged. The economics of having us at war with each other, or as I would like to propose, the perception that we're at war with each other. I believe that we are less divided than we are being told. Is that a possibility? Okay, that we're less divided than we are being told. Because when I get into rooms with people who come from these different worldviews, myself, not reading about this, when I get into the arena and lean in and we really explore what we share, I don't feel the same kind of division that I'm being told in the media, especially social media, that exists. When you're in a progressive camp and you look at, let's just go left to right and right to left, what do you think is being exaggerated in the traditionalist camp? What part of traditionalism? The shadow. And when you're in traditionalism, when Tucker Carlson is on TV, what part of progressivism do you think he's focusing on? The shadow. So we are seeing the worst in each other through what is being handed up to us. And this is not helpful. This is not going to create a path forward. Now, when you hear people who are saying, I don't want to be complicit with this culture war, I want to be a part of the solution, and there are a lot of us out there, and I hear them saying, Rand, can't we just find common ground? Can't we just find a middle point? And I love the intention. I don't personally think that it is going to get us where we need to go, because when we meet in the middle, and when we make trade-offs, and when we all come in and say, we're all going to give something up to find common ground, there is something important in common ground. It's necessary but not sufficient. It's foundational, but it doesn't take us where we need to go. And what I would rather propose is that we need to stop pursuing common ground and we need to pursue something more complex. Remember, elevating humanity through business, that's why we're here, a more complex move, which is higher ground. So higher ground would require us as leaders to be able to minimize the shadow, focus on the light of all three. And guys, this is the thing. I talk to people all the time. They say, Rand, I stand for inclusion. I'm like, awesome. I stand for diversity. I'm like, awesome. And they're like, as long as the people see the world the way I see the world, they're included. And you know what I call that? I call that conditional inclusion. And higher ground has an orientation of unconditional inclusion. The proverbial baby with the bathwater, where we don't throw out the human beings and we separate. We don't conflate the shadow with the human being. The shadow is real. And there need to be consequences, there need to be boundaries, there needs to be discernment for the pathologies without throwing out the human being. There is a transcendence in higher ground that requires us to move to something that is emergent, to something that is new, to something that has not yet been created. And so what if we were to contribute the light of each of these worldviews, the best of all three, into a new frontier, into a new orientation that allowed us to appreciate and respect and honor the diversity while simultaneously recognizing that each of these worldviews has something important to bring to the table, something important to bring to the party. And we want to take it with us. We don't want to leave it behind. Because if we think we can go, if you believe that the country's split, and I don't, but let's just believe the media, we're split half and half in this culture war, and half wants to go forward, and we want to heal this country, we can't leave the other half behind and vice versa. We have a responsibility to be a part of something that is emerging. So Rand, where are the companies that we can learn from that you can bring to the conference to talk about higher ground? Where are the leaders that we can bring to the conference to talk about what it's like to be up there? And what's the answer? They don't exist yet because it's so new that they have not actually been required to come online. This is our call to adventure. This is where we're being asked, I believe, to pursue. My daughters, I have 17 and 15-year-old daughters. This is hard because they think, one of my daughters in particular, she's very, very, very oriented, which I think is beautiful in a progressive view. And she thinks that I'm a super right-wing nut job conservative. And she's like, you're a conservative. And then I leave my house where I feel completely misunderstood in my own home by my own family. And I go out into the world and I have colleagues that are like, what are you talking about? You're like hugging trees all the time, Rand. In fact, you're like some woo-woo, like California, like they make fun of me. And if you were to ask me, Rand, what are you? Are you a traditionalist? Are you a conservative? I would say, not merely. Are you an achiever? But not merely. Are you a progressive? Not merely. I identify with the healthy parts of all three of these. And I try to recognize the dangers of the pathologies of all three. And so, in conclusion, I want to go back to the beginning of this experiment called America that is a pursuit. This is a dream. This is a possibility. This is not fixed. We should not see each other as nouns. We should see each other as verbs. We should see each other as dynamic things that are evolving and moving and growing. We should not see each other as fixed things. And what's so beautiful about the beginning was our original motto of our country, E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Out of many, one. We have always been diverse. We have always been complex. I don't think that we have fulfilled what we're supposed to be a part of fulfilling. I believe that we're a part of something that is a critical edge for not just America, but for the world, because the world is watching. And I know it's a cliche, it's a super cliche for a reason. If not us, who? Conscious leaders. I think this is why conscious capitalism is going to demonstrate its complete differentiation from the other movements that are out there that are in these different camps. Because we're a big tent, as Doug Rao would have said at the beginning of all of this. We're a big tent. And how do we actually live into that big tent? If not us, who? If not now, when? And so with that, I thank you for your time, and that's the end of the presentation today.